Hi.
Damn, she went to sleep already. And it ain't even done.
Okay. According to psychologist Jill Suddy, editor of Greater Good magazine, children notice differences across racial lines. Even from a very young age, babies scan a face differently if it belongs to someone of a different race, suggesting that racial bias may be hardwired. I have always been curious as to whether children see grave differences between us and behave inversely. Are we hardwired to be biased? Does social bias stem from childhood? This is the question I want you to ask yourself. By the end of this speech, you will know what social bias is, if we become socially biased from childhood, and how we can hopefully prevent children from becoming socially biased adults. Now that I've given you an overview of what I'll be discussing today, allow me to tell you what social bias is. Discrimination, prejudice, and stereotyping are all different types of social biases. When one person and or group judges another person and or group before communicating or knowing them, that's considered being socially biased. According to the Journal of Law Enforcement, bias comes in many forms, including race, gender, age, and ethnicity, and can be universal or location specific. Biased individuals believe these biases they are applying to others are right without regard for the truth. For example, if a person doesn't get a job because they're too old or too young, that's considered social bias by age, without knowing their capabilities. So now that we know what social bias is and how to detect it, let's talk about how children are affected by social bias. In an effort to get answers to their questions, can children catch social bias from being exposed to it? The Department of Psychology and Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences conducted an experiment. After showing a brief video to 67 preschoolers depicting nonverbal social bias in the favor of one individual, they found that children were indeed biased. Children were likely to behave pro-socially toward the target of positive nonverbal signals. The Nature of Prejudice, written by Gordon Allport, suggests that although parents may not explicitly teach social bias to their children, it may be caught by the child from an infected atmosphere. Previous research also indicates that infants develop negative emotions toward an object that they see another person demonstrate negative emotional responses to. So with what we learned, how do we prevent social bias in children? 1. Exposure. Author of the article 5 Ways to Reduce Racial Bias in Children starts by stating that exposing children to books, stories, movies, and different people of different racial groups in a positive light will change social bias.